Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Leela's life was shattered when Ethan left her pregnant and alone. Years later, he returns, asking for forgiveness, and they slowly rebuild their family. But when Ethan's ex-girlfriend reveals a shocking truth that Sophie may not be his daughter, their fragile happiness is threatened, forcing them to confront painful secrets and fight for their future together. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. Leela sat in the small coffee shop, staring at the cup in her hands, the steam rising in delicate curls. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, full of confusion and sorrow. It had been 2 years since he left, 2 years since Ethan had walked out of her life without a word, without a trace. Just when things were supposed to begin. She had been young, naive, and full of dreams when she met Ethan. He was everything she could have wanted, charming, funny, and thoughtful. He made her feel special, loved, and cherished. The two had been inseparable, and just when she thought their life together was about to reach its happiest moment, something unexpected happened. One chilly autumn evening, after they had been together for almost a year, Leela discovered she was pregnant. It should have been a moment of joy, a new chapter in their lives. She could still remember the excitement she felt when she first held the pregnancy test in her hands, the little pink lines confirming what she already knew in her heart. She had run to Ethan, her heart soaring with the news, but his reaction was not what she expected. He went pale, his smile fading into uncertainty. They had talked about the future, but the baby was never part of the plan. He said it wasn't the right time, that he wasn't ready. She tried to reassure him, to show him that they could make it work, but Ethan was distant. The more she talked about their future together, the more he pulled away. One day, without any warning, he left. No goodbye, no explanation. He just vanished from her life, like a shadow disappearing in the dark. And with him, her hopes and dreams crumbled. Leela was left alone, pregnant, confused, and heartbroken. She couldn't understand how someone who once claimed to love her could just walk away from everything they had built together. But the months that followed were a painful journey of self-discovery, resilience, and quiet determination. Leela raised their child, a beautiful baby girl named Sophie, on her own. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, she held on to the thought that she was doing the right thing. Sophie was her world. She was all Leela had left from the love she once shared with Ethan, and for that she was grateful. Yet, there were times when loneliness crept in. She longed to share the small moments with someone, to have the support of a partner. But there was never a sign of Ethan. The pain of abandonment never fully healed. But Leela learned to carry it with grace. She worked hard, put Sophie first, and found strength in the most unlikely places. Then, one afternoon, as Leela was walking through the crowded streets of downtown, a phone call broke the silence of her thoughts. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, her heart stopped. Leela. The voice on the other end was raspy and weak. It sounded almost like Ethan, but it couldn't be. "It's Ethan. I need your help." Her pulse quickened. "Ethan, what's going on? Where are you?" "I'm in the hospital. I don't know how it happened. I've been in an accident." His voice cracked, full of pain and regret. "Please, I need you." The words hit her like a tidal wave. Ethan, the man who had left her alone with their child, the man who had broken her heart, was asking for her help. Part of her wanted to hang up, to cut him out of her life for good, but there was something in his voice, something vulnerable that reminded her of the person she once loved. Leela closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. For all the pain Ethan had caused, she couldn't deny the love that still lingered in her heart. It wasn't the same kind of love she once had, but there was compassion, and there was kindness. She couldn't turn her back on him now, not when he needed her the most. "I'll be there," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotion swirling inside her. When Leela arrived at the hospital, her heart was in her throat. She was led to Ethan's room by a nurse, and when she stepped inside, she found him lying in a hospital bed, his body bruised and broken, his face pale from pain. His eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. There was a mix of guilt, relief, and something else in his gaze. Leela stood there, unsure of what to say. Seeing him like this was a stark contrast to the man who had walked out on her. She took a deep breath, finding the strength to speak. "Despite everything that had happened between them, I never stopped caring. Ethan," she said quietly, her eyes softening. "You hurt me. You left me when I needed you most, and I didn't understand why. But I'm here now, not because of what you did, but because you're human. And no matter what happened, I'll always help someone in need." Tears welled up in his eyes. I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve anything from you after everything I did. Leela sat down next to his bed, reaching out to gently touch his hand. It was an act of kindness, a gesture of compassion, not because he deserved it but because she understood the power of healing, even when it seemed impossible. I don't know what happened to you, Ethan, she said softly, but you've got a long road ahead of you, and if you're willing to make things right, if you're willing to rebuild, I'll be here, not for us, but for Sophie, and for you, if you need help finding your way back. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of unspoken words, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a new beginning, fragile and tentative, but real. Ethan squeezed her hand, his grip shaky but sincere. Thank you, Leela, he whispered, a tear escaping down his cheek. Thank you for giving me a chance, for showing me what love really means. As Leela looked at him, something inside her stirred. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: love, kindness, and compassion had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, coming back to save someone wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about giving them the chance to rediscover the goodness within themselves, and maybe, just maybe, that was all they both needed. As the days passed, Ethan's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Leela continued to visit him at the hospital, her routine becoming more familiar. She would bring him fresh flowers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes more than words ever could. He would smile weakly when she arrived, his eyes filled with gratitude but also regret. He was still fragile, both physically and emotionally. But Leela noticed something beginning to shift in him. Ethan was no longer the man who had left her in the cold. He was someone who had been broken by life, someone who had fallen victim to his own fear and mistakes. Every conversation they shared was full of apologies, long pauses, and moments of reflection. The man who had once been so certain of everything now seemed lost. He opened up to her little by little, revealing the weight of the guilt he carried for leaving her pregnant and alone. I was scared, he confessed one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. Scared of being a father, scared of ruining everything. And instead of facing it, I ran. Leela sat silently, letting his words sink in. She had heard the anger and pain in his voice for so long that hearing the vulnerability made her heart ache. Ethan had never allowed himself to be vulnerable before, but here he was, admitting his deepest fear. I was so selfish, he continued, his eyes filled with remorse. I thought if I left, everything would go back to normal, that it'd be easier for me to deal with my own mess. I never realized how much I hurt you, how much I hurt Sophie. I thought I was protecting myself, but in reality, I just destroyed everything good in my life. Leela swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She had never wanted to hear those words so badly before, words that acknowledged the pain he caused her, words that finally validated everything she had felt during the years of his absence. And yet, there was something about his sorrow that made her heart soften, even as it ached with the memory of the past. You don't have to keep apologizing, she said gently, her voice steady. I've carried a lot of anger and pain, Ethan, and it wasn't easy. But the truth is, we both made mistakes, and the past can't be changed. We can only move forward, one step at a time. Ethan nodded, his eyes brimming with emotion. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve you, Leela, but if you could find it in your heart to give me a chance, I want to be part of Sophie's life. I want to make things right, even if it takes years. Leela looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, compassion, and a flicker of hope. The journey they had been on was never going to be easy, but the possibility of healing, of finding their way back to one another in some way, seemed worth the effort. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, Leela said, her voice soft but resolute, but Sophie deserves to know her father, and you deserve the chance to make things right. We don't have to have everything figured out right now, we just have to start somewhere. As the weeks went by, Ethan began to show up for more than just his physical recovery. He began to change. Leela saw him putting in the effort, learning how to be a father, learning how to support Sophie, and most importantly, learning how to be honest with himself. There were still tough days ahead, moments where old wounds were reopened, but there was also progress. One day, as Leela watched Ethan gently hold Sophie in his arms for the first time since he had disappeared, her heart swelled with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Sophie, who had once only known of her father through stories and pictures, smiled up at him with innocent trust, her tiny hands resting on his chest. Ethan's eyes sparkled with a mix of wonder and overwhelming love as he looked at his daughter. She looks so much like you, Ethan said softly, his voice filled with, I can't believe I've missed out on so much. Leela smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. You can't change the past, Ethan, but you can be here now for her, for yourself. Over time, Ethan's bond with Sophie grew stronger, and so did his relationship with Lila. They didn't fall back into the old patterns of romance or rekindle the love they had once shared, but a new kind of connection began to form, a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and understanding. It was a relationship built on kindness, compassion, and shared responsibility for the life they had created together, even if it wasn't the life they had envisioned. One evening, as Lila tucked Sophie into bed, she stood at the door and watched Ethan playing with their daughter in the living room. He was laughing, genuinely laughing, a sound that had been absent from his life for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lila felt a sense of calm settle in her heart. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but the hope that had once felt so far out of reach now felt tangible. Ethan had come back into her life, not as the man who had abandoned her, but as someone who was willing to face the consequences of his actions and take responsibility for them. He wasn't perfect, but neither was she. Together they were building something new, not just for Sophie, but for themselves, a future based on second chances. And as Lila watched the three of them, and Sophie, and herself, there was something quietly beautiful in that moment. Maybe life wasn't about having everything figured out, or even about the love they once had. Maybe it was about healing, about learning to be kind to yourself and others, and about finding the strength to help each other even when the past weighed heavily on your shoulders. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, it was the everyday moments, the small acts of kindness, the compassion in their hearts, and the love that still remained despite all the pain. And for Lila, that was enough. As the months passed, their lives began to take on a new rhythm. Ethan, now fully recovered from his injuries, was more present than ever. He found a steady job and began to rebuild his life, taking on his responsibilities with a humility he hadn't had before. Lila, though still cautious, couldn't help but notice the difference in him. Gone was the man who had run from his fears and responsibilities. In his place was someone who was learning what it truly meant to be part of a family. Someone willing to work through the pain and regret that had defined so much of his past. Ethan's relationship with Sophie blossomed, each moment of connection between father and daughter a step forward for both of them. He would read her bedtime stories every night, slowly learning the names of princesses, pirates, and animals, while Sophie curled up in his lap, her little fingers tracing the words on the pages. There were still moments of awkwardness, where he wasn't sure how to comfort her when she was upset or how to calm her fears. But he was trying, and that effort spoke volumes to Lila. But it wasn't just his relationship with Sophie that was changing. Slowly, Ethan and Lila began to develop a tentative friendship. They would share quiet conversations over coffee, laugh together over Sophie's antics, and even begin to confide in each other. It wasn't the same love they once shared, not yet, but there was a growing sense of trust and understanding. The wounds of the past didn't heal overnight, and there were days when old resentment flared up. But there was an undeniable sense of healing in their small, everyday interactions. One evening, as Lila sat in the living room folding laundry, she glanced over at Ethan, who was sitting on the couch watching Sophie as she played with her dolls. He caught her gaze, and for a moment, they both just looked at each other in silence. There were no words needed. The bond between them, fragile yet real, was enough to fill the space between them. "You've changed," Lila said softly, breaking the silence. It wasn't a criticism, but a simple observation. Ethan looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think I had to," he said quietly. "I didn't realize it then, but I had to change to be the person you and Sophie deserved." Lila's heart fluttered slightly, and she turned her gaze back to the laundry. She couldn't let herself get too attached, not yet. She had been burned before, and the fear of being hurt again still lingered in her heart. But in that moment, she also felt something else: hope. Hope for something new, something different. A life where healing wasn't just a possibility, but a reality. Later that evening, as they all sat down for dinner, Sophie looked up from her plate with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Mummy," she said, her little voice high-pitched and full of curiosity, "when will you and Daddy get married?" Lila froze, the fork halfway to her mouth. Ethan, equally caught off guard, let out a nervous chuckle. Sweetie," Lila said carefully, her voice shaking slightly. "We're not getting married." Sophie frowned, clearly confused. "But I want you to," she said, with all the seriousness a 4-year-old could muster. "You should be together. You both love each other." Lila felt her breath catch in her throat. Love. Sophie had said it so innocently, without understanding the complexity of it. Ethan and Lila loved each other, but not in the way Sophie thought. The love between them now was one of understanding, respect, and healing, but it wasn't the same love they had once shared. But as Leela looked at Ethan, she realized something important. She wasn't ready to close the door on the possibility of a future with him. It wasn't about rushing back into something that had already broken once. It was about giving themselves time, space, and the patience to see what could grow. Ethan glanced at Lila, his eyes soft, and then turned to Sophie. "We love each other, sweetheart," he said with a tenderness that made Lila's heart ache. "But sometimes love looks different at different times. What matters most is that we're all together, and we're here for you." Sophie seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her food. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie's words had stirred something deeper in her heart. Perhaps, in time, they could rebuild more than just a friendship. Perhaps they could rebuild a family, even if it looked different than it had before. Weeks turned into months, and the small changes continued to build. Ethan and Lila found themselves becoming more and more comfortable with the new normal. They co-parented with a sense of harmony and teamwork. They began spending more time together as a family, taking weekend trips to the park, attending school events, and even sharing small, quiet evenings at home. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough for now. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, watching Sophie color a picture of a house with a big sun shining above it, Ethan turned to Lila with a look of quiet sincerity. "I know we're not there yet," he said, his voice filled with a mix of vulnerability and hope. "But I want to keep trying, Lila. I want to be a better father, a better man, and maybe, one day I can show you that I've learned how to love again, the right way." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had walked out on her, but the man who was standing before her broken, yes, but rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something more than just hope. She felt the possibility of a future that was no longer defined by the past. "I'm not ready to make any promises," Lila said gently, her voice steady, but kind, "but I'll walk this path with you, Ethan, and we'll see where it leads." Ethan's eyes softened with gratitude. He reached out to take her hand, and for the first time in a long time, Lila didn't hesitate to hold it. Maybe they didn't have all the answers, and maybe they would never have the perfect story. But in that moment, they had each other, and that was enough. The past had shaped them, but it didn't define them. What mattered now was what they chose to do with the second chance they had been given. And with each step forward, they slowly built the foundation of something new, a family, not based on perfection or flawless love, but on compassion, patience, and the courage to heal together. The road ahead would still be long, but as they looked at each other and their daughter, they both knew one thing for sure: love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. As the seasons shifted, so did the families. Dynamic, the days grew longer, and their shared moments began to feel more natural, more comfortable. There were still awkward silences at times, moments where the ghosts of the past hovered just out of reach, but they were fewer now. Ethan had shown Lila and Sophie a side of himself that he never had before, a side that was patient, kind, and willing to be vulnerable. Sophie too seemed to flourish. Her laughter filled their home like music, her innocent belief in love and family, a constant reminder of how pure the world could be if they allowed it. She became the bridge between Ethan and Lila, an unspoken bond they both cherished. Every time they looked at her, they saw the possibility of something better, a future that wasn't defined by their mistakes, but by their willingness to rebuild. One evening, as Lila tucked Sophie into bed after reading her favorite story about a princess and a dragon, Sophie looked up at her, her small face full of earnestness. "Mummy," she said in a soft, curious voice, "why don't you and Daddy get married, like in the fairy tales?" Lila paused, her heart skipping a beat. She had always loved the simplicity of Sophie's belief in happy endings, in the idea that love could conquer all. She smiled gently and sat down on the edge of her daughter's bed. "Sweetheart," Lila said softly, brushing a stray hair from Sophie's forehead, "marriage isn't always like in the fairy tales, but it's still something beautiful sometimes. Love is about growing together, about taking things one step at a time. What really matters is that we love each other, and we take care of each other." Sophie nodded, seemingly content with that explanation. "Okay, Mummy," she said, snuggling deeper into her blankets. "I think you and Daddy are perfect just the way you are." Lila's heart swelled. She kissed Sophie's forehead and whispered, "I love you, sweet girl," before turning off the light and quietly leaving the room. As Lila closed the door behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, closing her eyes. It was in moments like these that she realized how far they had come. She and Ethan were not perfect, and neither was their journey. but they were learning, growing, and slowly finding their way back to each other. Their bond was not built on fairy tale promises, but on something more real, more substantial: respect, understanding, and compassion. That evening, after they had both tucked Sophie into bed, Ethan and Leela sat on the porch outside, watching the sun set over the horizon. There was a peacefulness in the air, a quiet serenity that settled between them as they gazed at the colors of the sky. Ethan spoke first, breaking the silence. "Lila, I know it's not easy. I know I can't erase the past or take back the mistakes I made, but I want you to know something. I'm here for you, for Sophie, for whatever comes next." Leela turned to him, her eyes soft. The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for a moment she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope, real hope. She had spent so much of her time protecting her heart, keeping it closed from the world, but here was Ethan, willing to stand beside her, even when it was hard, even when it meant facing the consequences of his own mistakes. "I'm here too," Leela said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. "I've learned a lot over the past couple of years. I've learned that sometimes love isn't perfect. It's messy, and it's complicated, but it's worth fighting for." Ethan's eyes searched hers, and for the first time in a long time, Lila saw a glimmer of the man she had once fallen in love with, the one who had been kind, thoughtful, and full of promise. She knew they would never be the same as they were before, but that didn't mean they couldn't create something new. "Together I don't need things to be perfect, Lila," Ethan said, his voice low and earnest. "I just need to know that we're in this together. I want to be the kind of man Sophie can be proud of, and I want to be someone who shows you that you don't have to do everything alone." Leela smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile she hadn't worn in years, a smile that was free of the weight of resentment and bitterness, a smile that was filled with hope for what the future could bring. "We're already in this together," Ethan, Leela replied, her voice warm and steady, "and we'll keep going, one day at a time. Maybe we won't have all the answers, but as long as we keep trying, we'll figure it out." They sat together in silence, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Leela found herself realizing that the road ahead might still be difficult. There would be moments of doubt, moments where they both would wonder if they were doing the right thing. But in that moment, she knew that the one thing they could count on was each other. Over the following months, they continued to rebuild their lives in ways that surprised them both. Ethan took an active role in parenting, from taking Sophie to school to helping her with her homework. He attended every school recital and every soccer game, even when it meant rearranging his own plans. And Leela, in turn, found herself opening up more to Ethan, trusting him again, not as the man who had abandoned her, but as someone who was proving himself worthy of her trust. Little by little, they didn't rush into anything. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic promises. They simply took their time, step by step, letting the years of heartache and regret fade slowly as they created new memories. They learned to laugh together again, to share small moments of happiness. They found comfort in the quiet evenings spent at home. In the simple things: the sound of Sophie's laughter, the shared look between them over a cup of coffee, the warm embrace at the end of a long day. And then, one spring afternoon, as Leela and Ethan walked hand in hand through the park, Sophie by their side, Sophie asked the question again. "Mummy, when will you and Daddy get married?" Lila laughed softly, squeezing Ethan's hand. She looked at him, his expression full of hope and vulnerability, and for the first time in years, she realized that they were ready, not for the fairy tale wedding, but for the next chapter of their lives, whatever that might look like. "Well," Lila said, smiling warmly, "maybe one day, sweet girl, we will." Ethan squeezed her hand, his smile matching hers. "Maybe we will." And as they continued walking, Sophie's small hand in theirs, Leela realized that life wasn't about rushing into the next stage. It was about taking it one step at a time, finding beauty in the process of growth and healing. They didn't need the perfect ending to their story. What they had was enough: a family, rebuilt through love, kindness, and second chances. And that was a beginning that was worth celebrating. As the months turned into years, the bond between Leela, Ethan, and Sophie deepened. The walls that once divided Leela and Ethan slowly crumbled, and with each passing day, they discovered new layers of themselves, of each other, and of what it meant to be a family. It wasn't perfect, but it was real and imperfect yet beautiful mosaic of love, growth, and forgiveness. Sophie continued to be their light, her joy infectious, her curiosity boundless. She had become the heart of their family, a constant reminder of what they had fought for. She no longer asked if her parents would get married. Instead, she reveled in the quiet moments of family life that Lila and Ethan had learned to cherish. Family dinners became sacred, with laughter echoing through the house, and even the mundane tasks like grocery shopping or folding laundry felt lighter when they were done together. But as time passed, the question of marriage lingered quietly in the background. Lila hadn't been in a hurry to make that leap, and neither had Ethan. They had both learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about showing up for each other every single day, through the good and the bad, through the small moments that defined who they were as individuals and as a family. One evening, as the weather turned warmer and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air, Lila found herself sitting in the backyard with Ethan after they had put Sophie to bed. They had settled into a comfortable routine and evening ritual of sitting together, watching the sky darken and the stars appear, while they spoke about everything and nothing. Ethan, his expression thoughtful, turned to Lila. "Been thinking a lot about what you said all those months ago," he began, his voice steady, "about how love isn't always about grand gestures. It's about showing up, and I've been trying to do that. But there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Lila looked at him, her heart fluttering slightly. She had learned over the years that Ethan's words always came from a place of sincerity, even if they were often wrapped in vulnerability and doubt. This time, though, there was a quiet certainty in his voice. "Go ahead," she said softly. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze locked on hers. "Lila, I know we've been through a lot. We've been through the pain of the past, and we've come out on the other side. But I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I don't need a big wedding or a fairy tale ending. I just want to be here, for you, for Sophie, and for us. So, I'm asking, will you marry me?" Lila's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this moment to come so quietly, without fanfare or expectation. But here it was, a simple request, rooted in the depth of everything they had been through together. She looked at Ethan, seeing the man who had once run from his fears, now standing before her, vulnerable and open, asking for her to take that final step with him. A man who had worked so hard to show up for his family, not with grand promises, but with consistent love and commitment. "Ethan," Lila said, her voice full of emotion, "I've spent so much time wondering if I could ever trust again, if I could ever love the way I once did. But I've learned that love is not about perfection, it's about showing up, even when it's hard, and you've done that, every day. So, yes, I'll marry you. I want to spend my life with you, too. I'm ready." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he smiled, his heart swelling with joy. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, not knowing if he deserved it, but now it was here. He had come full circle. He wasn't the man who had disappeared all those years ago. He was a man who had grown, changed, and learned to love again. And now, he was being given the chance to prove that love in a way that truly mattered. Lila reached for his hand, holding it tightly as they sat together under the stars, the future stretching out before them, filled with hope and possibilities. A few weeks later, with a quiet, intimate ceremony surrounded by the people they cared about most, Lila and Ethan were married. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was exactly what they needed. There were no extravagant decorations or over-the-top celebrations, just a gathering of close friends and family, a reflection of the love they had built together over time. Sophie, the little girl who had once dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, beamed with joy, standing beside them as they exchanged vows. As Lila looked at Ethan, standing beside her, her heart was full of gratitude. They had both come a long way since the days of pain and uncertainty. They had healed together, grown together, and now they were starting a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that was theirs to write, no matter how imperfect or messy it might be. Years passed, and their family continued to thrive. There were challenges, of course. Life was never without its ups and downs, but through it all, Lila and Ethan found strength in each other. They found peace in the knowledge that no matter what came their way, they had each other to lean on. They had built a family not based on perfection, but on love, patience, and second chances. Sophie grew up to be a confident, kind, and thoughtful young woman, a reflection of the love and care that surrounded her. And as she reached adulthood, Lila and Ethan looked on with pride, knowing that they had created something lasting, something beautiful. The love between Lila and Ethan had never been about the grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It had been about the quiet moments, the acts of kindness, the willingness to show up for each other day after day, no matter the circumstances. Their love was built on forgiveness, on the strength to move forward, and on the belief that even broken things could be made whole again. And as they watched their daughter grow, Lila and Ethan knew that they had created the kind of love that truly mattered, a love that was real, a love that could withstand the test of time, a love that would continue to grow, no matter what life brought their way. Together, they had built a life filled with joy, with warmth, and with the unwavering belief that love, no matter how imperfect, could always find a way. As the years went by, Leela and Ethan's love continued to grow in ways neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't just about the quiet moments and the rebuilding of their family. It was more than that. Somewhere along the way, they had rediscovered the spark that had once ignited their passion for each other. It had never been a straight path, and there had been days when they doubted everything. But they had pushed through the rough patches, the doubts, the fears, and in the process, they had found each other again. Lila often found herself staring at Ethan, marveling at how far they had come, how much he had changed, and how deeply she loved him now. The way he looked at her with so much tenderness, with understanding and care, made her heart race the way it had when they first met. The man who had once been too scared to face the responsibility of their love was now the man who held her heart completely. That it started with little things, the way he would gently caress her hand in the kitchen as they made dinner together, how, after a long day, he would wrap his arms around her from behind as she stood at the sink, his breath warm against the back of her neck. It was the softness in his touch, the lingering glances when their eyes met, the way he had learned to communicate not just with words, but with his actions. He wasn't the man who had walked away anymore. He was the man who had learned how to be there, and that presence, his warmth and love, was what ignited the passion that had once seemed lost. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Lila and Ethan sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting, dancing shadows on the walls. The quiet was comforting, but there was also a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. They had come so far together, their connection had been built on trust, love, and commitment, but there was a part of them that had been dormant for too long. Ethan, sensing the shift, moved closer to her, his presence almost overwhelming in the best way. His hand brushed against hers, and for a moment, they both froze, the air between them charged. Lila looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the desire in his eyes, something raw, something intense, something they hadn't shared in so long. His hand slowly moved to her cheek, tilting her face up to his. "Lila," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't just want to be here with you. I want all of you. I want to love you like I never have before. I don't want to hold back anymore." Leela's heart raced as she gazed into his eyes, seeing the depth of his longing mirrored in her own. She had fought so hard to protect her heart, to keep a distance from the past that had haunted them both, but now, in this moment, she realized she was ready to surrender to him, to them, to the love that was waiting to be reignited. Without a word, she leaned in, her lips capturing his in a kiss that was soft at first, hesitant, as though they were both testing the waters, but then it deepened, and the years of longing and waiting came crashing forward. The kiss became more urgent, more passionate, as Ethan's hands roamed to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, his fingertips brushing the bare skin of her shoulders. Lila responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding up to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her touch. Her pulse raced as his lips trailed down her neck, sending shivers of pleasure throughout her body. She had missed this. Missed him, the man who had once been her everything, the man who had broken her heart, and the man who was now putting it back together, piece by piece. Ethan gently pulled her into his lap, and as their bodies met, the tension between them broke, replaced with a fire that neither of them could deny. There were no more walls between them, no more fears holding them back. There was only the warmth of his hands on her skin, the sound of their breathing, the feeling of her body pressed against his. "Leela," Ethan whispered against her ear, his voice rough, "I've missed this, I've missed you. I've been waiting for this moment for so long, and I'll wait for as long as it takes to show you how much I love you." Her heart swelled at his words, and she looked down into his eyes, seeing the depth of his love and longing. "I've missed you too, Ethan," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've missed us," and in that moment, with everything else fading away, they came together in a passionate embrace, their bodies intertwining as they rediscovered each other in a way that was more profound, more intimate than anything they had shared before. The past, the pain, the betrayal, the distance faded into nothing. There was only the now, the love, and the connection they had fought so hard to rebuild. Their love was no longer just about healing the wounds of the past. It was about passion, about desire, about the fire that had never truly been extinguished, even when it had seemed like it might be. It was about wanting each other not just emotionally, but physically, deeply, and completely. The following days were filled with tender moments and renewed intimacy. They took the time to savor each other, rediscovering not just the emotional connection but the physical closeness that had once defined their relationship. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word became a testament to the strength of their love. They spent quiet evenings together, making love slowly, deeply, as though they were finally able to catch up on everything they had missed. It was no longer just about passion, but about an emotional release, about sharing something sacred and deeply personal. They had finally allowed themselves to be vulnerable with each other again, and the passion that bloomed between them was not only physical, but a manifestation of the emotional healing they had undergone. Ethan, who had once been too scared to love fully, now gave himself completely to Leela, just as she had given herself to him. The pain of the past had shaped them, yes, but it had also made their connection stronger, more powerful, more meaningful. One evening, as they lay together, entwined beneath the sheets, Leela looked up at Ethan, her heart full, her body still tingling with the remnants of their love. She ran a finger across his chest, marveling at the way his body had become hers once again. "I love you," she whispered, her voice hushed with the weight of everything she felt. Ethan kissed her forehead softly, his hand resting on her cheek. "I love you too, Lila, more than I ever thought possible." And in that moment, as they held each other, they knew they had found something extraordinary. Their love was not just built on second chances or forgiveness, it was a love that had evolved, grown, and blossomed into something deeper, something more passionate, something unshakable. That the love they shared was no longer just a bond of necessity or duty. It was a passionate, consuming love that filled them both completely. And with every passing day, it only grew stronger. They had learned that love could be messy, imperfect, and complicated, but it was also beautiful, powerful, and worth every sacrifice. And in each other's arms, Leela and Ethan had found not only the love they had lost, but a renewed passion that would carry them forward. No matter what life had in store, their journey had been long and hard, but it had led them to this moment where love and passion intertwined, creating a future that was theirs to write, one filled with endless possibilities and a love that would never fade. As the days passed, Lila and Ethan's love continued to blossom, their connection growing deeper and more powerful with each passing moment. They had finally arrived at a place of peace, of love, something they thought was lost to them forever. It was as though their love had emerged from the ashes of the past, more vibrant and intense than ever. They had spent years rebuilding their family, their trust, their relationship, and now it felt like they had finally found the happiness they had always dreamed of. Their days were full of shared laughter, intimate moments, and long walks together, hand in hand, under the shade of tall oak trees. Sophie had settled into her routine, flourishing in the love and security that surrounded her. Life was finally good. It was, in many ways, perfect. But just as they thought they had found stability, the past like an old ghost returned to haunt them. It happened one chilly evening in late autumn. The leaves outside had turned golden, their vibrant colors swirling in the cool wind. Leela was at home, preparing dinner, when she heard a knock on the door. It was unusual for anyone to visit at this hour, especially without prior notice. Her heart skipped a beat, a small pang of unease stirring inside her. When she opened the door, she was met by a figure she never expected to see again. That was Carl, Ethan's ex-girlfriend. Leela's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Carla was standing there, looking slightly disheveled, but with an air of confidence that had once been part of her charm. The woman who had been in Ethan's life long before Leela. The woman who had shared the pieces of his heart that Leela had fought so hard to claim. "Ethan's not here, is he?" Carla asked, her voice thick with something that Lila couldn't quite place. "No," Lila replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's not." Carla hesitated for a moment before stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I need to talk to him," she said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "I have something to tell him." Lila stood frozen, trying to piece together why Carla had come. What could she possibly want now? After all this time, after everything that had happened, why was she showing up at their doorstep? "I'm not sure if he'll be back soon," Leela said, her heart beating faster now, a quiet tension beginning to curl inside her. "What's this about?" Carla turned toward her, her eyes serious. "It's about Sophie." Leela's stomach dropped. "Sophie? What could Carla possibly want with Sophie?" "You don't understand, Lila," Carla said, stepping closer. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but you need to hear me out. Ethan doesn't know this, and I didn't want to bring it up, but I don't have a choice anymore. Sophie, she's not his daughter." Lila blinked, her mind racing, trying to process the words. What do you mean?" she whispered. her voice trembling. Carla's eyes were filled with regret. Sophie was conceived the night I was with Ethan, right before he left. And then, after everything fell apart, I thought it would be better to leave it in the past. But I can't live with this secret anymore. Sophie, she's actually mine. Lila stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. It was like the ground had shifted beneath her, and she was falling into an abyss of confusion and shock. What are you saying? Lila asked, the words barely leaving her lips. I'm saying, Carla continued, that I'm Sophie's real mother. I don't want to take her away from you, Lila, but you need to know the truth. Lila's world spun around her, 1,000 thoughts colliding in her mind. She tried to grasp onto something, anything, that made sense of what Carla was saying. It couldn't be true. Ethan had raised Sophie. He had been there every step of the way. Lila had always believed they had built this family together, that their love and their journey had led them to this moment. But this was a twist she hadn't seen coming. Carla's words hung in the air like a suffocating weight. As Carla turned to leave, her face softening with guilt, she added one final piece. I never wanted to hurt you, Lila. I never wanted to tear this family apart. But Ethan deserves to know, and so does Sophie. You have a right to the truth. With that, Carla walked away, leaving Lila standing in the doorway, her heart pounding. In her chest, her mind was racing, thoughts swirling like a violent storm. Sophie wasn't Ethan's daughter. Lila closed the door behind her, collapsing onto the floor as everything she thought she knew shattered around her. Sophie had always been the light of their lives, the product of their love and their shared dreams. But now, everything felt like a lie. What did this mean for their family? For the love she and Ethan had built? Could they still stay together, if this truth was real? Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, before Lila gathered herself enough to stand. She had to tell Ethan. She had to understand the truth. Was this just a terrible mistake? A misunderstanding? Or was it something more? When Ethan returned home, Lila was waiting for him in the living room, her expression unreadable. She had spent hours wrestling with the whirlwind of emotions inside her: hurt, confusion, disbelief, but now she needed him to explain. As soon as Ethan saw her face, his demeanor shifted. He knew something was wrong. He sat beside her, taking her hands in his. What's going on, Lila? What happened? Lila took a deep breath, her voice steady but trembling. Carla came by. She began, looking him in the eyes. She said something about Sophie. Ethan, she told me that Sophie isn't yours. Ethan's face went pale, his lips parting as he processed the words. What do you mean? He asked, his voice hoarse. She says that Sophie is hers. That night, before you left, when things were falling apart, she said she was pregnant. And that Sophie's her daughter. Ethan's face contorted with confusion, anger, and disbelief. That can't be true, he said, his voice rising. Lila, I raised her. I'm her father. I thought so too, Lila said, tears brimming in her eyes. But what if she's right? A long silence hung between them, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Neither of them knew what to believe, but there was one thing they both knew: this would change everything. Ethan stood up suddenly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I need to see her. I need to talk to Carla. Lila grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. Ethan, we don't know if it's true. We can't just go on a witch hunt for answers. We need to talk to Sophie, and we need to figure this out together. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes filled with the same determination he had once had when they first met. We'll figure this out, Lila. I'm not going to let her go, no matter what. And in that moment, Lila realized that no matter what happened, no matter the lies, the confusion, or the betrayal they had come so far, the love they had fought so hard to rebuild was strong, and nothing, not even this shocking twist, would tear them apart. But the road ahead would be difficult. They had just uncovered a truth that would challenge everything they knew about their family. Yet Lila and Ethan knew that the only thing they could rely on now was each other and the strength of their love. No matter where this new revelation would lead them, they had been through so much already, and they would fight to protect the family they had created, whatever it took.